Welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I am your host. And today on the show, we're going to unpack the first of our connecting practices from our new parenting curriculum called Cultivate Connection, and it is to be curious. And to do so, we've got Dr. Rachel Peterman, a clinical school psychologist, and Becca McKay, who is in the social work field and has been back at ETC for a while now, helping write Cultivate Connection. But we brought both of them on today because we want to talk about why being curious as a parent or as a caregiver, as an adult giving care to a child is so important. It really does serve as a foundational principle for everything that we are ever going to either recommend or give advice for from an ETC standpoint. And so it's vitally important in the life of a parent. And so we wanted to talk about that first as we kick off this series of talking about our connecting practices. And so we'll do that in just a moment with Becca and with Dr. Peterman. Before we get to that interview with Becca and Dr. Peterman, though, I want to remind you that our friends at Ryan and Rose have made a special discount code available for listeners of the ETC podcast. It's an unbelievable discount. It's 20% off of your total order at Ryan and Rose. It couldn't have come at a better time because their June collection has just launched. There's all kinds of new products and new colorways and all that all available on the website at ryanandrose.co. Ryan and Rose, I mean, you know, if you've been listening for a while, they provide families across the globe with cute, safe, and functional products, redefining the baby industry with guidance from the Lord. Now, the thing is, it is not just baby products. It's not just family products. There are things on there for everybody. So whether it's a universal bottle holder or you're buying pasties and passy clips for your kids or for a baby shower coming up, you're going to find safe, functional, cute things for your kids at Ryan and Rose. And they have been big supporters, big fans of our program for a long time. And so they want to make a special discount available for ETC listeners. And it is ETC20, code ETC20 at checkout to get 20% off of your total order at Ryan and Rose and support a company that is also supporting a bunch of incredible work happening across the globe. So head to ryanandrose.co for more info or to buy stuff from their new June collection. Now, without any further ado, it is our interview with Dr. Peterman and Becca McKay about being curious. Well, as I mentioned in the open, we've got Dr. Rachel Peterman here from ETC as well as Becca McKay. And so we're going to talk today about our first connecting practice. We introduced the idea last week, obviously, you know, Becca, you're part of this painstaking process to rewrite curriculum, which did take literally several years. And so, if you don't mind, why don't you kind of set up for today kind of the connecting practice we're going to talk about, and then we'll get into it with Rachel and talk more about it then.
Absolutely. So today we're talking about being curious, which is really kind of the foundation of all of the connecting practices, because we can't really do any of the other things that we want to do until we're curious and we start looking at things with like a different mindset. So when we're curious, we can be reflective of ourselves and observant of not only our kid, but also the environment around them. The environment is the people, the places, the activities, all the stuff that they have to engage with. So when we're curious, it just allows us to think more deeply about what is it that we're bringing to the table? What is it that our kid is bringing to the table? And how can we move forward in a positive adult-child relationship? It helps us move from being automatic to thoughtful and from reactions to responses. We, like we mentioned last episode, each connecting practice has 3 core components. So for be curious, kind of the ideas that we unpack in our course are being mindful of our history, which is like, how were we parented? What have we been through in our life? What are we bringing to the relationship? And then our attachment, be mindful of attachment, which is something that you can look back. We've got so much content about attachment. Yeah. It's so foundational to who we are as ETC. And then being mindful of why is like thinking about behaviors as communication, and not only our kids' behaviors, but also ours, like looking a little deeper and digging into the why there. So that's our practice, and those are our 3 core components, and it comes first because in real life it has to come first too.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, unfortunately for us as parents, like almost every time that we begin a conversation about a topic, whether it's, one of our professionals here in Memphis, or whether it's, whether it was Mona Taylor Hook mentioned this, Tina mentioned this, it's always starts with us, right? Like it always starts with us considering our own history and our own stuff that we're bringing to the table. And that's the place I want to look last. Like I don't ever want to know that this behavior I'm seeing is actually something that is probably at the core of it, something I need to unpack my own self, like why it's driving me so crazy. And so, Rachel, I think when we talk about being curious and like, a few weeks ago in the show, we talked about seeing the need behind the behavior and all of that. What does that bring up in you as you think about it? I mean, both as a therapist, as a parent, like, why is it such an important thing for us to start with when we think about this?
Well, the word why, which you just said like multiple times, I think is often our first question when you look at behavior, like, why is this happening? So you're asking, why is my child doing this activity? Why are they frustrated? Why are they throwing this thing? Why am I so upset about it? Yeah. Sometimes, why is somebody else so upset about it? I know there are things that bother me that don't bother my husband and vice versa. And I'm like, why aren't you irritated about this, right? And so that is a clear difference between what I'm bringing to the table, what he's bringing to the table, and then what is actually going on with our kiddo. So that why question, I think, kind of comes through, and we've got to ask ourselves, like, why is this happening? And then once we know that, we can better understand the need and be able to meet that need.
All right, Becca, I mean, we start off talking about considering our own what we're bringing to the table, our own history, all that. When you hear that, like, there's a time, I mean, obviously you worked in schools extensively for a while, and did you begin to notice even in your work with kids at the schools, like sometimes you're more easily triggered than you should have been because of something that, was from your own past?
Oh man, 100%. I think that I'm somebody who has pretty much been pretty obedient my whole life. So when somebody in any kind of authority says, we should do this, I'm like, okay, I want to do it. I don't want to mess up. I want to do it right. I want to be perfect. Yeah. So then translate to, I'm now in quote unquote authority in a school. And it was like, I was just like baffled. I'm like, how are these kids? Like, I can never imagine being 8 years old and looking at an adult and being like, no, like, I just can't. And then what you just said, Rachel, is really getting me thinking, because it's like with other adults, I can be like, man, why are you so mad about this and I'm not, or vice versa. But with kids, it's like, you shouldn't be this mad. Yeah. So I think I went into schools with just like, why in the world is not being the line leader making you this mad? Why in the world is that kid bumping into you or looking at you, making you this mad? But I wasn't coming at it from like a humble, genuine, why is that upsetting to you? I was coming at it from like this is ridiculous. You should stop feeling that. Yeah. So I think whenever we think about the why with adults, I can be so much more compassionate and like, oh man, I like you said, Rachel, I've definitely felt the like, why are you not as mad as me with like friends or my sisters or anybody? But with kids, it was the opposite. I was projecting onto them what I thought they should or shouldn't have feelings about versus trying to understand, okay, but really why? And I think, when I was in the schools, it was before my ETC days, and an early ETC training really started to change my perspective when I learned about the brain, because it was like the stress responses, that chemistry stuff really helped me start to shift. Then I turned the question on myself, and it was like, why is my answer to every kid's question no every time? That was the culture of the school, was no, you can't stand up. No, you can't sharpen your pencil. No, you can't sit by your friend. No, you can't ask a question. And it was a no culture. So the first two big things that I had to like wrestle with was, why are kids feeling the way they're feeling? And why am I saying no all the time? And those are kind of the two big shifts that I made, I think, early on, like way before I knew any of the strategies or even what to do next. Those are kind of the first two that popped up for me.
I like how you said, why am I saying no all the time? Because through what I've learned with ETC and TBRI, asking kind of the flip of that is, why can't I say yes? Mm-hmm. So if I'm asking that more positive, from like a more positive perspective. I'm like, okay, what happens if I do say yes? Like, what is this actually going to allow them to do? So that's helped me a little bit, just to sort of flip it around. I don't know. I think that helps.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and when we look at our own attachment history, Rachel, can you give us just kind of why does that matter, our own attachment history, and then how might that play into this also?
Well, I think, like Becca was saying earlier, I know we have so much content on attachment, so I don't want to go too deep, but I would say that it's really important that we're recognizing what we're bringing to the table from an attachment perspective of, are we dismissing that feeling? Like Becca was talking about, like, you shouldn't feel this way. You know, is that where we're coming from? And is that why we're thinking that they shouldn't feel that way? Going back to my why question. Or is it, oh no, I have to do this, or why aren't you more upset? Because maybe you're almost in mesh. Like, I'm upset, why aren't you upset? Right? Or are you kind of getting it more right? Is there a more secure attachment where you're starting to really question, what am I doing? What are they doing? And why do we each feel this way? And then responding not out of that emotion, but out of what needs to happen. It kind of pulls that out. So I think that can be helpful.
Yeah, I was even thinking about a situation that we had this morning where, like, I can't be too specific. So I'll just say I found myself being irrationally frustrated about something that nobody else around me saw as an issue or a problem. And it wasn't until I then kind of went back to, like, we had car trouble this morning. So all of a sudden we had the dance of, like, now getting everybody the 5 different places they had to be in a short time instead of dividing and conquering. And then, you know, after this thing at school is over, we got to go somewhere else and get this person here, then get to the office and then get back. And so, like, in the moment when a kid didn't, you know, operate as quickly as I wanted them to in a particular way, I'm going like, well, now, and I'm projecting all of the day's frustration or craziness onto this one child who was just super overwhelmed because of loud cheering in the room we were in, right? And so, like, thinking for about 2 seconds, being curious about my own stuff for about 2 seconds, led me to remember, like, that's why I'm so stressed out. That's not their fault in this moment. Like, this is an individual response that makes perfect sense based on what I know of it. So now I'm curious about what this person's going through, and if they've got some sensory stuff where they get overloaded very easily with loud noises, well, then all of a sudden I can see that and go, oh, well, that makes sense. Oh, it makes sense why I'm upset too. And then we can both kind of collectively be like, all right, deep breath. Let's move on to the next step, you know? So it doesn't make the situation less stressful, but if we know the reason why, it helps us to take the emotion out of it, to, like, not level that emotion at that person. Like you were talking about, like, having an appropriate response, like leveling our response at the actual situation and not over emotionalizing it into the, is that a phrase, over emotionalizing?
Sure, can be.
I like it.
We'll take it.
We should
You
use
can put
that.
that in the new curriculum. So, like, not over emotionalizing all of that into the situation allows us then to just, like, kind of keep cool heads and address the situations and move on, right? And so, all right. So, kind of our first core competency,
Core component.
we're looking at ourselves. Second one is
Attachment, and the third one is the why. And what's funny about the core components as we were making them, JD, is, like, I think as humans, we're drawn to, like, step-by-step lists. And when we were making this curriculum, I mean, if you take a Cultivate Connection course, we talk about be curious in probably like 10 out of the 18 modules.
Yeah.
So it's one of those, like, things where you're just entwined and it's all working together. And I love how Rachel just said, when you understand your own attachment, it helps you understand your history. That helps you know what you're bringing into that exact moment by moment, which can help you understand the why. So they all kind of play together.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of it's a beautiful thing. Sometimes I feel like it's easy to be curious in all those 3 ways with, like, big repetitive situations. If you've got a kid who's like, I don't want to go to school, and it happens one day and it happens 2 days, and then you're a semester in and they're, like, chronically absent because you can't get them to go to school. That's one of those times where it's like, man, I can step back and really ask why. I think what you just described in the, like, loud auditorium, it's so much harder to be curious when it's those day-to-day moments, those little things. And that's where, like, being a reflective person, being a reflective adult, over time, I feel like you get more comfortable thinking about it in those moments. So like you're somebody who's been like enmeshed in this content for so long, you had the like wherewithal to pause for 2 seconds. But for a lot of us, it's so hard in the moment. Like after the explosion, we're like, oh, maybe I was hungry and my car wasn't working and whatever else. But for me, I feel like those day-to-day moments, man, that's where kind of the rubber meets the road, and that's where you can really see growth in your relationship, is when it's that day-to-day. What have you found to be true about that?
As you were talking, I was thinking about the therapeutic role. And as a therapist with different families, often they would come in with a bigger situation, like not going to school or you know, this constant problem working with peers or something like that. They don't get along with their siblings. And so you can stop and assess and ask the why and be curious about all the things and work through and find some good reasons to figure it out. And that's great. And that can help what seems to be a big issue. But the actual day-to-day, the situation changes every time. And so you're constantly having to ask with this new set of data. So this is my like psychology mind, you know, coming to play of like, okay, now we've got all this other data because it's a new setting and it's louder and there's more people and you're not used to that. And so then you have to reassess what's happening right now. And that does take practice. And I think you have to keep working at it and giving yourself grace when you don't get it right, or looking back when you're like, oh wait, this is what happened. So stopping to say that's okay, and we'll keep working on it.
And we've been talking a lot at ETC about how like it's the end of the year. So everybody, like every day, somebody's going to an end of year program. Somebody's going to a field day. Somebody's going to a graduation. I know that dates us a little bit of where we are in the year, but we're there. We are right there at the end of the school year. And there's all these one-time events. And so it can be easy to kind of fly off the handle ourselves, or for our kids too, because things just aren't the normal routine. And there's like different situations facing us. And maybe we've got a kid who didn't get the award they wanted, or maybe they didn't win the field day game they wanted to win. So again, for my history, it's like reminding myself, man, they can be upset about that. That's okay. Like, it's okay for this kid to be upset that his team didn't win the field day race. Whereas in my mind, I'm like, field day is a list of things to check off and then keep it moving so we can get to the end of the week. Like, let's get to the end of this, please. So I just think about like, man, that day-to-day, those moment by moment. Rachel, how do you feel like people can do it? Like, how do we become more reflective and curious in the day-to-day? What have you found to be helpful?
That's a really good question. What do I do? I mean, I feel like I just ask. Go ahead. What?
Yeah, I was going to say, I have one for this, actually. Like,
go for it.
And actually, at the assembly this morning we were at, so this is a athletic awards banquet or whatever. And so one of the coaches got up and just said, just want to remind all of y'all what we talked about in practice every day. My one thing to leave with you is just to remember that practice makes permanent. And that the more we practice things, and they would harp on that for school, for homework, for practice, for habits of putting jerseys away after practice and putting balls back on the rack when they're done, all that. Like, those practices that they did every day made things permanent in their brain. And they would remind them, like, all of your habits, all of your things, like the repetition of doing that all the time embeds it in your brain as a permanent habit that you can go to. And so I think, that wasn't some hero act of me, like, being patient in a moment this morning. I wanted to just, like, scream and yell and, like, throw an equal tantrum, like, because I felt inside the way that this kid was expressing themselves outside. And there's lots of people around watching, which also helps me have a patient response, because I'm a people pleaser and I care what everyone thinks way too much. And so all those things. But it is that this is also the youngest, and there's lots of practice we've had with the other ones of messing that up along the way. And so because of that repetition and all the times of me flying off the handle and seeing it not work, I think there is a final, like, there's starting to be some habits in place. Where I can go, oh gosh, this is happening again. But I can also just be patient for a moment and make myself low, 2 hands and 2 eyes, and then, like, start asking a few questions and making sure, do my checklist. Are we in a quiet place right now? Is anybody else looking at us? Can we get around the corner somewhere where we have a bit of privacy and there's not this, like, like, swirl of stuff around us? And in the beginning, when we first started trying to parent this way, oh my Lord, have mercy. It took an act of God for that to happen the first time. Because I was spending 10 minutes remembering the checklist in my head, and the kid is already 10 years down the road. They've already moved on.
Yeah.
And instead, now the repetition. So if you're just getting started parenting this way, or you're thinking like, well, how the crap do I remember that right in the moment? The answer is just like, you will over time, but practicing it and just trying and then trying again and trying again is one way that it happens.
JD, though, you also described a whole routine related to that.
Yeah.
You said you stop and you get eyes and hands. That's not exactly the words you used, right?
Yeah.
But you have sort of a plan that you've already set in place for how am I going to pause and respond instead of react, right? So you give yourself that moment to think about what are you going to do. And then you've already thought about what this kiddo may need, because you've thought ahead of time, you've experienced, you've learned from some past experiences, obviously, some of the things you mentioned that might help him or her. So I think that might be a good tip too, is sort of having a plan for whether you're in public or at home, whatever the situations are, thinking, okay, if this is triggering for me, how am I going to stop and respond? Is it I stop and take 3 deep breaths first and then I respond? Or is it
good.
I go through this moment of connecting, which I love that, of like getting eyes and hands from your kiddo and making sure that they're with you. And just that moment to do that, you're already slowing yourself down.
Yeah.
And then engaging in that next, okay, now I'm going to go through and start asking the why questions. Or answering them, because you already had a bunch of answers. You're like, I don't know what the answer is right now, but it could be they need a quiet space. We need to talk somewhere else. They need to get around the corner. So you had already thought through that. So I think that's great.
I'm really curious for you, like both of you guys, as you're sharing stories, JD, you're talking about, I know that I get embarrassed around people when they're watching me. Like that's number one, really vulnerable to share. And number two, like, man, yeah, I feel that way. Like, I'm like, oh, you're talking and I'm like, oh, I'm resonating with that. I feel very like, oh my gosh, people are watching me and they're judging me. And especially if people know that you're trying to engage with kids in this trauma-informed, attachment-based way, there's like an extra layer of pressure of like, man, I got to prove that this works to people that don't believe it. And so I just think that was so insightful. And same with you, Rachel, with talking about like the things that like kind of push your buttons or like get you upset or whatever. How have you guys kind of like walked through that process? I'm just sitting here curious. How have you walked through that process of like, what are the things that really bother me? Like what really brings up that kind of response in me?
I think for me, my husband has been quite helpful in helping me figure that out. And I had my mom living with us for a number of years, my mother-in-law. So there are people and friends, just people around me that are like noticing when I'm getting more upset. And so them pointing out to me in a loving way, because they are supportive people, being like, I noticed you got really upset about this, and I'm watching them not get upset, like we were talking about earlier. And so they're able to stay calm and then kind of help me through it. And then I can step back and be like, why? Why did I do this? Was this my history that was playing in? Was this really not safe for my kid? You know, maybe it was. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes that sort of bigger response is because it's a bigger deal and we need to be more concerned. But often, even when that's the case, we want to make sure that we respond in a calm, controlled way. So even the big deals, we still need to catch our breath before we engage in trying to handle it. I think that's helpful, hearing from others and then having that self-reflection of, okay, wait, what is really going on here?
What's the deal here?
I mean, I think one of the hardest things to do, if we do understand the brain, it's really helpful for ourselves, like you mentioned, like, do I take 3 deep breaths first before I go in? I mean, because there are times where, I mean, and all of us, I wish we didn't. All of us have those instant triggers, right? Like this morning, like I've been worn down over time. We do have 4 kids. So by now I'm like this hardened, grizzled veteran of parenting. We're like, I can have a little bit of a measure of patience before I like jump into a situation. But all of us do have our instant triggers where it's like, somebody does something and you just, before you even realize it, your amygdala's flipped and you're in your survival response, whatever that might be. And so I think that consistency of having like your support team actually be able to say stuff to you that they notice.
Yeah.
And some people are more approachable than others. Some are less approachable than others. Like what feels non-negotiable, you mentioned your husband, like, you know, my wife's been the same for me, but we have friends who also are on this path. And sometimes they don't even have to say anything. Like I can, like you're saying, I can watch them not react. And there's a measure of like, I mean, it starts as competitiveness. Like, why are they better than this? Better at me than this? Mm-hmm. And I can then kind of think about, oh, here's these factors. And before I realize it, I have kind of evaluated like, oh, they have these factors going on, but I don't have this, or I do have this, or I've also got this. And I'm starting to realize what might be causing me to feel this way. And then I can slow down and react. And there is a measure. If you've got a safe group of people, right, be it family, friends, whatever, there is a healthy measure to peer pressure that exists within that kind of group. Now, it can turn toxic really fast, but when you do have people who are, you know, they love you and you know that you love them, and there's a solid base of relationship there. When you see, you know, a side eye looking at you like, oh, why are you losing it like this? Or somebody pulls you aside to say something to you. Sometimes it can be embarrassing. And also, if it is within that safe group, it's helpful. It is helpful. And we have to be willing to look at things from the outside. Like I think about just having been in athletics, like, you know, most of my life, and now having kids who compete and stuff or do, you know, stuff in the arts, like watching your own film is miserable and so helpful. So like when we start the podcast, I would listen back to it to make sure there's nothing messed up before we put it out. And it was just the most miserable hour of my week every week. Like I just would despise, I hear my own voice. I'm like, oh God, why do you sound that way? Like, oh, right. And then I would hear, you know, droning on too long about X, Y, or Z thing. But then the next week, my question's a little bit tighter. Like I made sure I used my outdoor voice or whatever. So, I mean, I think, you know, when we can't watch our own, we're not recording ourselves all the time, right? So like we can't go back and watch our own film sometimes. So our friends, our family, they can be our film for us to help us know what we're doing wrong along the way.
I'm going to push you there. You're not doing anything wrong.
Well, but you know what I'm saying.
But like where you take a misstep or where you do like let your emotions get the best of you. Yeah. I think for me, I've been so thankful. I'll call you out, JD. You and your wife like adopted me. I mean, I moved to Memphis. I was straight out of college, baby Becca, and just invited me into your living room. You lived across the street from the school that we worked at, and I stopped by 3 to 5 times a week and was just in your space getting to see you parent. And then some other folks that I go to church with invited me in their homes in the same way. And then I ended up in grad school living with a family that had a 5 and 3-year-old at the time. And so got to see their like day-to-day life. And I think seeing different people's families helped me kind of see, oh man, like so-and-so's house rules are blank, but so-and-so's are blank. And so it just really did kind of broaden. Like I said at the beginning, I was raised in a very like black and white, right and wrong, yes, no, obedient, disobedient kind of a way. And I think having those friendships really showed me, man, we bring a lot of ourselves to that equation. Yes. We bring a lot of like what we think and how we've been parented and what our parents' thought and what our friends think. And so I just think that step back with those safe relationships to just see it for what it is. Like, it's okay to have a line that's this is right and this is wrong. We all have that. It's just being aware of it and not letting it get the best of us, or not letting it go I don't know the right word, like unobserved, like not letting it be an automatic thing, but making it an intentional, like, okay, I'll throw out an example. Like in all those homes that I just named, in some of those houses, it's okay for kids' feet to be on the couch, and in some it's not. And if you were to ask a parent, like, I mean, I've seen parents and even in my own family explode at a kid who put their feet on the couch, versus I've seen other houses where everybody just kind of snuggles up together on the couch. So that's like one example of like, man, it's okay to have a rule. We don't put our feet on the couch. That's great. I had one of my best friends came over. We just moved into a new house. She came over because it was my birthday this weekend. And one of my sweet buddies, their feet was on the couch. I didn't care. I don't really care. And she was like, hey man, remember, did it in a very gentle way. Hey man, remember, we don't put our feet on the couch. And so like she was bringing her values into my house in a super gentle and intentional way, versus at other times when we're just like why the heck are you continuing to put your feet on the couch? Like,
right.
So you know what I mean? It's not bad to have those boundaries. It's just knowing them and being able to communicate them and being able to hold them in different kind of environments for your kids. Like, there's just no one way, I don't think. And so I hope when people hear even the three of us talk, like, we all internalize this a different way. Like, that's just what it is. And I think culture has a lot to do with it. Our parents have a lot to do with it. What we believe has a lot to do with it. And again, all those things are awesome. It's just not letting it get the best of us in those day-to-day moments to where we're so disconnected from our kids because we're just reacting. So, man, I'm thankful to my friends who have like pulled the curtain back and allowed me into their space to be able to see it.
You stole my word earlier. I kept thinking about it, and then you had to say it, was observe.
Yeah.
It's being curious is so much about stopping to observe. So whether you're observing other people and families and how that dynamic plays out, or you're observing yourself, or you're observing your kid, or you're observing the whole situation, it's like stopping to look and just evaluate what's going on. And sometimes it means you do something, and sometimes it means you don't. But at least that being curious is about just taking that minute to stop and observe what's happening before you then react and respond.
And I think about all the time, you know, whether it's talking to family members or just new people that we're meeting, when the cat comes out of the bag and people notice that we don't parent in the same way that we were parented growing up, there's always this kind of moment of like questioning that you get and like why, and you can see the wheels turning, and usually the question that comes out is like, okay, but like you just let your kids, you know, do all this stuff, and then you're thinking that you might be wrong before you correct them for something. Like, what's the deal with that? And I think that to keep the end in mind, like to start with the end in mind, and the end of parenting is like our goal is that we've done everything we can to prepare our kids to thrive the best they can in the world, right? It's going to look different for every human being that comes through one of our houses, and some are going to be with us in home forever, and we're teaching them how to like do the best they can in that environment. Some are going to fly out of the house like a rocket ship at age 18 and ping pong all over the world and do their thing. Some are going to, you know, follow the like conveyor belt kind of American plan. They'll go to, you know, out of high school and into college and into a workplace, entry-level job, and they'll just climb the corporate ladder or whatever. Like, so all of our kids are going to be in a different space coming out, but how can we prepare them the best they can as they leave, you know, different seasons of life to thrive in the world? And one of the most helpful and honestly magnetic qualities of another adult is somebody who does not just fly off the handle, assuming they're right all the time about everything, and like go through life with the, you know, the iron fist out front, just bulldozing their way through. Because we always think about that person and think, man, how does this person not see how they're affecting everyone around them, right? Well, that can start with us modeling that now, and modeling being willing to repair things when we've gone wrong, or when we've been overly emotional, to make it not a big deal in our homes for us to go, yeah, you know what? Earlier I was wrong for the way that I responded here. And we have to be careful how we do that, right? Because we're not wanting to like then teach our kids that the response is like, well, mom and dad always say they're wrong, so I guess I'm the one that's right, and I could, you know, whatever. Like, we're not trying to send that message, but being able to repair and say, you know, and I forget who it was that, I think it was Mona that said this when she was on, like, hey, buddy, you know what? This is my first time parenting a 12-year-old. And, you know, and sometimes I'm going to get things wrong. And here's the great news. It's your first time being 12. And so you're going to get some things wrong too with this. And so we can both figure out where we've made mistakes, then we can repair them and start and try again next time, you know? And I think that simple model of like, I don't have to have all the answers. I'm going to try to figure it out as I go, but I'm also going to constantly be evaluating and trying to figure out what's going on. Does strengthen those skills. So as you grow older, like, again, that practice makes permanent. Like, if you're seeing your parents constantly be curious and trying to figure out, you know, the needs behind behavior or the why that's happening all around us, it makes you curious as well. And so then we've noticed one of our kids who is, you know, the most natural child care person in our family, like, you know, she does do some of that automatically now. Like we'll notice her with neighbor kids like doing that, and you're like, oh, is this too loud for you? Here, let me help you cover your ears. And I sit there watching. I'm like, well, now we're done. We can be done parenting now.
It.
See this happening, right?
That's it. Reached your goal.
And as we get older, that obviously like pays huge dividends as an adult in life, right? And so
I think too, a big thing that we talk about in the course is this idea of offering. So I love like thinking about JD, whether your kid is the kid who does the thing that you thought they would do. They graduate high school, they go to college, then they get a job, then they get married, then they have kids, then you're a grandparent. If that's their life, or if they're the kid that's going to live with you forever and you're figuring out what that looks like, I love that it really is that the goal is about the relationship that we have with them. The goal is to continually offer, and relationships are a two-way street. Like there's two sides to it.
Yeah.
And we often want to control the kids' side. Like we want to make them have a good relationship with us.
Yeah.
And that's just not how it works. So I think the like being curious and letting go a little bit, just letting go a little bit of that pressure and being committed to, I can offer myself to this kid. And I can offer co-regulation, and I can offer my presence, and I can offer, all of our other connecting practices are about what we can offer. But I think this one is like, man, stop for a second, think about your own history and your own expectations, and then like make decisions about how to continue to offer yourself to that kid, no matter if the expectations match what you think they will or not.
that's really good.
Those expectations are tricky, right? Because we have these beliefs about what should happen or what we think is going to happen or our history and our preconceived things, right? We're bringing that back to the table.
Right.
And so we think it's a certain way. And, sometimes you're navigating that with other people as well, like a spouse, and trying to work through that. And you might have different ideas of what is expected. But ultimately, I think when you go back to that curiosity too, when those behaviors show up, whether they're, I think it's important too, not just like a challenging behavior or a misbehavior or something that went wrong, but just constantly asking, like, why are you thinking that? Why are you doing that? Why did you make this choice versus that choice? Can help us just to better understand the kids.
Yeah.
And then it helps them understand themselves, because they're not always asking themselves why. How often, this just happens all the time, where we say, well, why'd you do that?
Right.
Actually, thinking they're going to answer, right? And they're like, I don't know, like I wanted to, right?
Right.
Which isn't really the answer that we're looking for, because there's more behind the because I wanted to that we've got to figure out. So the better we understand and ask what motivates them, why are they doing the things that they're doing, the better we can help them understand themselves and their own values. And then they can move forward, and we're supporting them in who they are, not who we expect them to be.
Well, something that also my wife does really well is, along that same line of thought, also being curious when things go fantastic and when things go great. And so there will be times where we'll be, I was out of town this past weekend, and sometimes we're out of town, things will go really, really well. And she'll automatically kind of say and she'll rattle off like the 10 factors that were happening that helped contribute to that going well. And I file that away. And so if she's out of town, then I'm starting to remember back, oh man, this actually worked really great. And this was kind of the flow of how they put things together throughout the day. So then it's helping me to be successful too. And so I think that like, it is good to just kind of be in a state of just looking for the why behind everything, like positive and negative, right? Like if challenging behavior comes out, we check it. But also when somebody thrives, like let's figure out like what contributed to that, or at least like just kind of file away some of the circumstances. And then when some patterns emerge, then we can help predict and like put them in great situations to succeed,
And so, you just gave the best example, like, why is your kiddo asking somebody, hey, is this too loud? Do you want to cover your ears? You know the why. The why is because you guys chose to parent this way a long time ago. And so I think it's also like encouragement for you to keep going. It's like, okay, like this is the kind of people that we as a family want to be. These are the kind of values that we want to have. And so like you said, modeling that. I just love, that's a great example of like, sometimes you don't get to see a lot of fruit. And so when you see the fruit, it's just really it's good to pause and like take that encouragement and be excited about it and be like thankful for it, because it's sometimes the labor that goes into getting that kind of fruit is just long and hard and deep. And so it's good to just kind of pause, and I love that.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been great. I think, it is one of those topics, as you said, Becca, this theme is going to come out almost every week throughout our conversation. So we'll definitely talk about some different angles along with that. But I think as a foundation, we've covered a good bit of ground this morning. Any last thoughts from either of y'all before we head out today?
I think I would just encourage all of you to try to take that pause and try to ask yourself sort of that why, what's happening right now, and then what can I do to help that situation, right? Like being curious about what's going on, what's going on with kiddo, what's going on with you, and then making a choice based on that, not just that emotional reaction that we were talking about earlier.
That's great.
I just love that we talked about it a lot, but just starting with yourself. What bothers me? What annoys me? What pushes my buttons? And like you said, JD, maybe ask your spouse or your best friend, like ask people that can like be honest with you without it hurting your feelings and just start to pay attention to those things. And again, not because that means you're a bad person or a bad parent, but just like paying attention to that lets you make a choice, lets you decide, okay, this is what I want to do next time I encounter XYZ. So I just love that idea of like, if this whole idea is new to you, take a minute outside of the stressful moment to pause and reflect and talk to people and think, so that next time you're faced with that moment, you've like your expectations are already set a little different, or you've decided beforehand, hey, this is what I want to do with that.
Dr. Rachel Peterman, Becca McKay, thank you all, and we'll see you soon. Well, again, just a foundational principle there, being curious, and the need for us to do that is immense. It keeps us as parents from overreacting to a lot of different things. If we can keep our first kind of emotional reactions at bay and learn how to be curious about what's happening as opposed to being accusational or oppositional right out of the gate, man, it saves us so much drama and so much complications in our parenting. So hope that episode was helpful. Listen, we got them coming now. They're coming all through the summer. Our new connecting practices, we're going to be rolling them out all summer. And our episode for next week is great. It's already recorded, ready to go. And so we will be walking through our next connecting practice next week, but you'll have to tune in next week to find out what that is. And so for everybody here at Empowered to Connect, for Becca McKay, for Dr. Peterman, for Tana and Mo Ottinger, for the whole ETC team, for Kyle Wright, who edits and engineers all of our audio, and Tad Jewett, the creator of the music behind the Empowered to Connect podcast. I'm JD Wilson, and we'll see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.